Episode 3. Mr. Tortoise clapped his hands, gathering the attention of his flock and retching me from the comfort of my mental faraway place. The initial minute of having to burden my soul with climbing back into my aching mind felt like broken glass being drawn across my nerves. Sober nightmares are always the worst, and after blinking my eyes several times, I found mine had not yet ended, and like a knife in my gut, was about to twist. Grand bronze doors bursting with filigree opened opposite our lineup. The tantalizing smells of an opulent feast stretching beyond either side of the doorway cast an unspoken spell, drawing the mass of bobbing heads chattering their way to the next room. From my narrow view, I could make out roasted pigs the size of mini-fridges, fountains of splashing wine, Greco-Roman ice sculptures in various states of ecstasy, and pyramids of golden roast quails swimming in gravy. So impressive was the display that not a single attendee looked down at the bloody footsteps they tracked into the next room. As servants guided the Olympians to their meal, Mr. Tortoise circumvented the stampeding herd to address us privately. Tomorrow, your benefactors will gauge what you are capable of through a series of tests. After, you will attend the lighting ceremony, from which you will compete in your first race. Follow my servants to your temporary contestant housing. There you will be fed and have access to amenities. Normally, I would prepare you with some instruction, but I'm much too busy, so I'm afraid you'll have to wait till the morning. Now, sleep well, my rabbits. Mr. Tortoise clapped a second time, signaling our guard-guided movement towards the rear of the ballroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the fox that had questioned me earlier, engaging Mr. Tortoise in a hushed conversation. Before I could leave the blood-splattered ballroom, I felt the heavy hand of a guard grab my shoulder, pulling me from the departing line. Your generous benefactor would like a word. When you're finished talking, look for me by the statue hall door. I'll guide you to the contestant housing. He then left to stand by the door the rest of the contestants passed through, leaving me to meet my generous benefactor. I still wasn't sure what that title meant or why he had the ability to speak to me alone, but I found the prospect of gaining more information and possible answers to my questions compelling. There he leaned next to a pillar, alone in his Italian suit, as thin as the cigarillo he sparked. Heavily puffing to start its cherry, the smoke billowed in airy tufts wrapping around the end of his mask's snout. Once successfully started, he turned his attention to my slow approach, waving his hand urgently. I increased my speed till I stood at attention to the deep drag of rich chocolate-smelling tobacco. Come, I won't bite. I just asked for a little face-to-face time since Mr. Tortoise and I are such pals. His young voice, post-pubescent, but not by long, saturated with sarcasm. Dropping the performative voice he used earlier, he relaxed to a more comfortable tone and stance. Look, it should be obvious by now that there are real consequences for a bad performance. In this world, you need to know how to assert yourself, or adapt to being asserted on. The smart ones know how to do both. It's a little give and take. However, due to trends operating both in and outside of your purview, I'm finding it increasingly difficult to give. I continued to stand still, waiting for him to finish his next prolonged drag. The closer I looked, the more I realized that he must have been barely 18, maybe 19. He could have been my younger brother. Why then did he speak with the authority of someone thrice his age? We're both in a bad situation. You more immediately so, since you just watched your first young woman die, a pointless death, because of two assholes who forgot their stage direction. Pausing mid-thought, he reflected. It was a smart play on Mr. Tortoise's part to dangle someone Mr. Glow couldn't resist, but we can get into that later. Hiding himself from the view of the open bronze doors, acting as a pinch point to the cattle run, he whispered, 9.
We're going to have to help each other if we want to get out of this alive. I chose you because you're an athlete who can also think and reason. I read your art history papers you wrote from your stunt in college. They were surprisingly sophisticated. Not many people have the courage to approach Bellier's designs from a planner's point of view, much less arguing that his designs could and should be made for a new age. I found it a shame that you haven't been intellectually stimulated since then, so I brought you on to my motley crew for the all-important task of being a crowd favorite and not dying. Remember, not dying is important, and despite what Mr. Tortoise said about Number 1's murder, you'll still be put to the test tomorrow.
After taking his final drag, he looked back towards the large double doors, still open and echoing the obnoxious laughter only the truly wealthy were required to perform. I followed his gaze to a barely noticeable Mr. Tortoise, the right half of him hidden, peering from behind the door's frame. He must have been staring at the column we stood behind the whole time we were speaking.
He can be such a creep sometimes. Anyway, I better go do my thing. I'm going to plant some seeds we'll water later. Go. Eat, get some sleep, and don't die. It's not just about me supporting you. It's about how many Olympian families you're popular with. Remember that, and we're all going to get out of this better than fine. Now, I have time for one quick question, so ask away.
Whatever processes were required for formulating a question were clogged by the influx of information, all begging to be indexed with emotional tags, so I knew what nugget of exposition I should be most angry or concerned about. Instead, I gave up on the thought-intensive exercise, opting to temporarily accept the insanity of my new role as crowd favorite to the ultra-elite. My mind hadn't yet cracked, but deep down I knew that if I pushed too hard against the pressure of its bend, it could very well snap. So, I instinctively soaked in simplicity to reduce any chance of snappage by asking a simple question.
Who are you?
He stood back in some surprise, chuckled, and flicked the cigarello onto the ground.
My apologies. My name is Mr. Gold. I am your primary benefactor, which means I own the most shares of you. With each win, you make people who invest in you richer. My job is to inspire others to buy shares of you. The more popularity you gather, the more people will want to win. The more clout we obtain, the more social capital we have for our plans. So, tell no one of what was said. Treat everyone like they're out to kill you, and don't stop winning.
Mr. Gold slapped my shoulder like a coach after giving the quarterback a passionate pep talk. It was performative, but then again, there were eyes in the room other than Mr. Tortoise, stealing glances at what I assumed was an unusual interaction between an Olympian and a mere mortal. His stance straightened, air of the socialites descending upon him as an ephemeral mantle he had no choice in bearing, then sauntered from the concealment of our column towards Mr. Tortoise. Mr. Tortoise looked past him like a pastor trying to scan my mind for evidence of sin. He locked our gazes for the third and final time that day. Because of my surrender to simplicity, I gave no evidence as to what was said. He couldn't read my eyes because there was nothing being thought behind them. After some strain on his part, the engagement was finally cut by two tuxedoed servants closing the large double doors. The metallic clang rang through the mostly empty ballroom. A cleaning crew rushed in from the servants' entrance, bottles and towels in hand. Panicked, hushed strings of obscenities passed between them as though the words were the active ingredient in stain removal used to scrub at the pools of blood. I had nearly forgotten the blood myself, but for the poor souls whose lives depended on the floor being immaculate, it was the only thing they thought of the whole time. They probably cursed Mr. Gold and mine's name for staying as long as we did. The guard standing next to the Hall of Statues cleared his throat. It was loud enough to redirect my attention from the busy drones to the next door I had to pass through. For some reason, I didn't want to leave, but the thought of reflecting on why I wanted to stay provided enough discomfort for me to push the thoughts away and live in the moment. My job was to stay alive, and staying alive meant not making problems for the guards to permanently end. So, I joined him in his wordless walk past several more servants ferrying carts of cleaning supplies through a large hall of ancient marble statues, till we turned down a smaller corridor leading us out of the palace and into a long, walled courtyard. Low path lights projected posthumous shadows of limb-laden creatures through the plethora of exercise equipment stacked around the edges. The cool night air and jaggedy black outlines separating the stars from the Wasatch mountain range felt good to behold. It was a fleeting pleasure tied to the escaping seconds between the guard's pace and whatever laid beyond the next door. Ignoring the courtyard walls, I needed the openness of the space around me to regain some sense of smallness. It reminded me of my placement in the universe, and that there was still a universe beyond the evil I had so willingly jumped into. Sure, they lied about it being some kind of club, but I should have left the moment I saw Mia in her mask. The most awful of internal dilemmas I pushed away was the intentional ignoring of warnings because I wanted to be wanted. I wanted to have and not have to remember wanting. Because of those basic primeval desires, I now found myself praying to the stars above. I didn't pray for some miraculous end to my woes. I prayed that there would, in fact, be a way out. That escape wasn't just a carrot dangled for us to run, but that I could win. And if I could win, I could also be rich. After all, I didn't want to die, but I also didn't want to be poor. And thus the self-damning dilemma that brought me there kept me walking like a good little rabbit into the contestant housing. The guard opened the door and pushed me inside, bolting the door behind me. My stumble and slam of the door alerted the eyes of the 7 other contestants to my arrival. They sat at a polished slate dining table in the center of a long open room. Its aesthetic felt like a modern rustic interpretation of a hunter's mountain home. 9 cast iron single beds asymmetrically hugged the walls with a large number hanging over each head to denote where each competitor would sleep. A bleached white antler chandelier provided light over the 7 other contestants, masks lying next to their plates or on their beds, while the dinner of trout, rice, and vegetables looked well made. I couldn't help but think of the feast we had seen earlier. Ours was the food of athletes, theirs were the pampering of gluttons. Some returned to their meals, while others continued to track my gait to the end of the table. I contemplated ignoring them, but halfway towards my seat, I decided it was better to return the stares of whomever thought it was best to study me. The eyes and their faces of those looking at the mask I had not yet discarded told different stories. Number 2 was a young man of some Asian descent and a soft face whose placid surface concealed concern. Number 3, the woman in her 30s whose calm demeanor preserved number 1 long enough to be used as a pawn in a seemingly much broader game than the one we raced in, stoically portrayed genuine non-emotion. Number 5, a tall lanky kid who smirked defiantly, daring criticism of his confidence, spread his arms out from his plate to draw more attention and enlarge his presence.
Why'd you stay behind? What makes you so special?
What felt like sudden accusations triggered an automatic response I didn't know I had. It moved through my vocal cords with the same energy I had felt earlier. It was the voice, that had nestled in my head, pushing to operate without warning or permission. I could have stopped it, but the surge of a cold, recalcitrant response felt powerful, and after my one respite of cold air and stars had been exchanged for what was clearly the insinuation of favoritism, I let the voice off its leash and shot back.
Down, boy. If you beg nicely, I'll feed you some of my scraps after I win.
His face soured, an unimpressed hiss passing his teeth.
It's not so smart to be insulting the fastest man here.
If you thought that, then you wouldn't be barking so much. Now, let me eat in peace.
You're a jokester. Just remember we're all sleeping in the same room.
Oh, what are you gonna do?
Just sleep. You'll find out.
You good at Wet Willies?
In a face that attempted disgust, but looked more confused than anything else, number 6 replied,
Wet what? What the hell are you talking about?
What, you don't have Wet Willies where you're from?
As I took my mask off, I stood at the end of the table, displaying my pinky for all who cared to look, swabbed it across the inside of my mouth to make a pop with my cheek, then wiggled it in my ear. Some people smiled, others made stifled gasps of tension escaping their tightly bottled emotional state. The one I was most surprised by was number 3. She never once looked at me, but from the corner of my eye I noticed her fleeting smirk break through, then, just as quickly, disappear.
I'll tell you one thing, 5. You try to ruin the fun for the...
I paused, stopping myself from saying freaks because I could safely assume our interactions were being recorded, and my new job, after all, was to be crowd favorite. I enunciated carefully.
Our benefactors? What do you think will happen?
Number 7, the muscular jarhead who had been silent till now, chose his moment to interject the obvious.
You'll get blasted like number 1. Like I said would happen the moment she screamed.
The table quieted, and I sat, turning my attention to the uneaten trout in front of me. After several minutes, 2 spoke up.
That was messed up, right? If I knew anything like this was going to happen, I would have never joined.
His eyes and voice authentically searched the table for some reciprocation of humanity. Number 3 replied, no trace of femininity in her voice.
Did anyone else here read beyond the 3 summary pages before signing?
She spoke emptily, as though once filled with a spirit that had been taken from her long ago. Number 4, maybe in his 30s, leathery skin and barrels for legs, dropped his utensils. Exasperated, he said,
You did? There was like 1,000 pages. I assumed it would all be standard legal stuff. You willingly signed on for this? Anyone else think it was just an athletics club?
He raised a hand and looked around expectantly. No one cared to reveal their thoughts by raising their hands in response. After all, there was a level of distrust and performance now required of us both by our benefactors and by the laws of survival. We may not have liked Mr. Tortoise, but his suggestion to look for weakness in each other was pertinent advice.
Number 6, an unassuming Navajo with messy hair, quietly responded, I don't think murder is okay.
Number 7 broke into the conversation with a forced, cruel laugh.
Murder is a perfectly common, acceptable, everyday thing. What's not acceptable is anyone outside of our elite benefactors or their allies perpetrating or paying for it.
He spat his words out now, dripping with contempt for number 6 who was sitting across from him.
We are cattle. Hell.
7 rapidly smacked his mask against the table.
We are literal rabbits to our fox overlords. This is reality, 6, and you better believe I don't want to hear yours or anyone's names because none of them matter, and soon I'll be so rich that mine won't matter to anyone in this godforsaken state because I'll have a compound in Vietnam with armed guards for the rest of mine and my kid's life. They'll never have to see the things we see, and that's fine by me. I'll kill anyone who gets in my way, but I don't think I'll have to. You want to know why?
6 matched his tempo, obviously frustrated with the way he was talking. Please tell everyone, 7. I'd love to know why you'd kill for a Vietnam property. Let me guess, a shack by the beach, where you can also find a wife that loves you for your personality? 7 hardened his tone to a dangerous edge.
Because, 6, 5 of you are already dead, and 2 of you will fight to the death to be second.
Number 8, a man of deep ebony skin, thick Congolese accent, and an ageless face, spoke with congested disgust.
You're a real piece of shit and a liar. You know that?
Number 7 pointed his steak knife at 8, slowly standing while his hand whitened from the pressure of his grip.
What? You think when you warned us that we didn't want to be last after killing 1, that it wasn't some kind of warning? That our first race tomorrow is going to be consequence-free since she died?
He threw his knife across the room, fixing its point with a loud thud in the wall under his number. Surprised, 8 shifted backwards, then jolted up.
What's the matter with you?
7 kicked his seat back, then stomped around the table to his bed.
Just try something. One of you. Please try grabbing the knife while I sleep, so I can justify slitting you and save myself the hassle of leaving you in the dust.
He flopped onto the mattress, folded his arms, and lay staring up at the serrated knife stuck above him. 8 shook his head, returning to his nearly finished meal. Number 5 ended the night's conversation by saying, "Good to know," after which he belched loudly. The rest of us finished our meals in silence, finding it more comfortable to complete our individual nightly rituals without interruption. At the foot of my bed lay some toiletries and a towel. I felt much too tired to take a shower or brush my teeth. It somehow felt meaningless, and the thought of rest to ease my mind appealed more to me than anything else. As soon as I slipped under the covers, I fell fast asleep. That night, I found myself back in the Hall of Statues. My soul felt a small measure of healing at the sight of the stone. While lacking color, the rosiness of joy, the draining of envy, the fury of jealousy were impressions conveyed through the overall believability of its artistic genius. There was no one around me to express this feeling of admiration I had. It felt lonely, admiring an artist whose spectacular work went unnoticed because it sat between doors people walked to, when the statues themselves were a destination. My observations were interrupted by the creak of a side door I had not noticed being there before. A strange mask materialized from behind the door, like a page pushed from a printer. The mask was blocky and black. It was matte where there should have been sheen, and shine where there should have been shadow. The cheekbones curved upwards in parallel to the ends of its snickering grin, leading me to notice that its eyes were mostly hidden by the shadow of its jutting eyebrows under the hall's white overhead lighting. While I couldn't make out the eyes' color, I could discern their mischievous glint. After the mask's introduction, an arm below it snaked outwards, fist uncurling, then waving for me to follow. I was compelled to follow, my point of view shaking as a marionette would in its bouncing shamble at the mask's invitation. I made like Alice down the rabbit hole, though instead of falling beside pieces of floating furniture, I descended a torch-lit spiral staircase. The steps of ancient limestone bowed, worn in the center from centuries of use. Black spots staggered the underside of the steps above me, assumedly from the torch's flame marking the same passage of time. Away from the statue-studded marble-columned hall, the air grew increasingly hot and stale with each story we descended. I say we, but I didn't actually see the figure belonging to the mask and arm till we finally reached our destination. He stood next to a small arched wooden door, perhaps 5 feet tall, in a paint-stained white button-up shirt, tan suspenders, holding his baggy dress pants to the height of his stomach, head shaved to a small stubble, skin lacking color to the point of gray tones. He slowly opened the latch, checked inside, then led me inward. Despite having to bow to enter, it was a spacious room filled with sheet-covered paintings, easels, oil vials with brown-stained cursive labels, and stacks of canvases in all forms of development. However, what was more noticeable than the art supplies was how much the room felt like a manic episode. The tan, stucco walls were interspersed with hundreds of wall lamps from entirely different clashing styles. It was chaotic, as though the designer smashed random holes in a fit of rage, then decided the room needed more light, so that's where he would install colors of every type. Some helical twisting exposed Edisons, some blinking LED stoplights, and a couple of fluorescent blacklight tubes were the least outrageous design faux pas present. One of the more ridiculous ones being several green emergency exit signs inserted where there should have been blades on a slowly spinning ceiling fan. The most normal light was a chain of Christmas bulbs roped across the ceiling and down the wall to disappear in a space about 2 feet above the floor. I almost returned to my study of the neurodivergent lighting when the question of the dark space refocused my analysis of the realm I stood in. Yes, it was an expansive room, but the floor was secured to the walls and ceiling by iron anchors like bars to a prison cell, in the area one expected to see a baseboard. Light couldn't penetrate the floor circumferencing void of darkness just taller than my knee. It was a chilling oddity surrounding the insanity of decor casting technicolored omnipresence on the study of my hosting artistic madman. Leaving the question of the darkness beyond the room as another unexplainable, my eyes wandered to the more completed paintings and their stories told in rich varnish-cracked oil. Most of their styling and subject matter were reminiscent of Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. Knights slew hideous monsters, nude fish creatures lured holy men from their pious paths, distressed peasants hung from chains above spikes and hellfire, causing one to question what they did to deserve such cruelty. The artist stuck his hands in his pockets and joined me in the admiration of his work. Preserving his silent persona, he tapped the frames of one of the completed works and shook his hand laterally in a so-so signal. Putting an arm around my shoulder, he directed at first my attention and then my steps to the rear of the room. Against the wall stood a large crescent-shaped rectangular structure covered by a draping tan sheet. Placing me on the right, he positioned himself at the other end. The artist, still sporting his mischievous glint, pointed to me, then the other side of the cloth. I understood his intention and mirrored him in rolling up the backside of the sheet before throwing it off. We stood back to observe the work in silent amazement. Perhaps 7 feet tall, 20 feet across, spired the largest triptych I had seen. Unintentionally, the words passed my lips. "It's beautiful." He snorted like I had stated something obvious, but patted my back to show appreciation for my admiration. "Is this all yours? Did you painted all of this?" He nodded, then pointed to the topmost left of the first panel. It's difficult to describe the scenes played out across the 3 sections, since much of the details escape me. However, I knew that while these paintings seemed impossibly cluttered with conflicting settings, colors, and characters, that it was intentionally painted that way to express a chaotic history not quite usual to the format. The placement of its scenes intuitively helped me comprehend its movement. Starting from the point of his finger, walked a group of dark backlit figures into a forest. From the forest, its inhabitants spread to multiple castles, and from those castles to other cities and places marked by thin golden lines of differing patterns likely signifying lineage. Small oval portraits of ladies and sirs hovered above each city, their avatars at times rising to prominence, at other times being driven from the city back into the wilderness. These figures eventually built seafaring ships to cross star-speckled oceans into the central panel. The center panel held mapped borders of continents. There is no one depiction of any particular land mass, yet one shore held similarities to Africa, Asia, the Mediterranean, and lastly, America. Great temples and cities were built to effigies matching the dark figures from the first panel. The lines of heritage continued till the top of the mostly unpainted third panel, where it showed enclaves of riches building in several prominent cities, one of which bared remarkable resemblance to the modern Salt Lake City skyline and her mountain range. With no real chronology to mark the passage of time, the start of the third pane could have bore enough space to add another couple hundred or 1,000 years of progress. Our study of his fine brush technique and the intricacies of his subject matter felt as timeless as the work itself. After exhaling, my attention turned to the curiosity of what could be behind it. As I started towards the back, the artist leapt forward, grasping my arm to hold me in place. Surprised, I stopped my curious advance and apologized. His eyes looked up into mine, and for the first time, I saw their color. They were violet rings of reflective silver scrutinizing the contents of my mind. It wasn't an act of conniving or speculation read from my overall demeanor. I could feel his eyes physically probing my soul for qualifications only he knew. The artist absorbed the contents of my past, felt the motives for signing away my life, and wrestled with the same moral dilemmas I had over the past 24 hours. For some reason, he never approached the voice, like a houseguest judgmentally eyeing the owner for harboring a resting rabid dog. After his review, his vision retracted from me, and so too did his hands holding me. He nodded towards my previous path and folded his arms. I took it as a sign to warily continue my investigation. As I crossed closer to the triptych's edge, the room's lights dimmed, and their vibrancy lost strength. My vision morphed to sinister, stark contrasts. An icy breeze blew from the black space surrounding us, carrying with it an equally dark presence, using the drafts to wrap round my legs and creep up my spine. The presence exerted enough pressure to push my legs and back, an eager, atmospheric entity willing me forward. Once passing the triptych's frame to behold the other side, the enormity of its horror frightened me. Complex carvings of indescribable creatures amassed in hordes of a hellish existence weren't just the creation of a mind dedicated to accurate portrayals of evil. The wooden reliefs moved amongst each other, animated to commit atrocities upon a sea of floating human-like faces, screaming in eternal agony. Energy radiated from its knotted, inky surface, undulating my perception, widening my focus away from the room to an unfolding damnation pouring from the rear of the triptych. The sensations intensified to the point of hearing the multi-tonal screams of evil's perpetrator and receiver, reeking copper sick stenches of bloody battlefields and their rotting aftermath threatened to retch the contents of my stomach. My expanded focus devolved to an uncontrolled obsession with the carving's extraneous details, miring my senses of being into the spinning ensairment of oscillating vertigo. I didn't need anything else. I didn't want anything else other than what the carvings told me. I basked in insanity, and I enjoyed it. My hellish state of overstimulated revelry in the allure of carnal evils was thankfully short-lived. The artist entered at the edge of my vision, forcefully pulling me from it. Our bodies crashing against the floor woke me to heavy breathing and a pool of sweat in the early morning of my second day at the palace.